as several large enterprises have learned from their high-profile data breaches, cyber resilience is not about technology per se. It has more to do with patching the human brain. Social engineering, or indeed hacking the mind, remains the preferred avenue of threat actors, including well-resourced nation-states, mainly because it targets the weakest link in the enterprise that cannot be patched with technical solutions. However, several enterprises still mistakenly believe that cyber resilience is about investing in fancy tools and attaining multiple compliance seals, paying scant heed to the human factor. Such over-reliance to technology is a strategic mistake that not only creates a false sense of immunity, but also any hope of using any emerging technology to seal those enterprises from social engineering attacks is hugely misguided. Today's discussion will focus on the CISO Playbook, Developing a Cyber Resilient Culture. My name is Darren Argyle, and I'm the host for today's webinar. I'm also the chairman of the Cyber Leadership Institute, who is sponsoring today's online event. Today's session is the second in our series of webinar series, and our first webinar was the introduction to the co-founders and the Cyber Leadership Institute, the work that we do at the Institute, and we explored strategies that CISOs can deploy in this new normal during the pandemic. Today's webinar and upcoming webinars are themed around our recently published series of playbooks. Today's discussion will focus on the CISO Playbook, Developing a Cyber Resilient Culture, which you can download in a link below, and also from our website. Both of our panelists will be giving some practical examples on their own experience of implementing many of the recommendations that are highlighted in the playbook, and how CISO teams can pivot their culture programs in 2021 to be more effective. Today with me, I have Jasmin and Chris, both are steeped in expertise around changing the human behaviors and developing cyber resilient cultures in their organizations. So Jasmin Krapf has been working in cyber transformation since 2009. Coming from a business change management background, coupled with 12 years of cyber experience, Jasmin has helped organizations deliver effective change and capability uplift in a positive way, and finding ways to combine secure thinking and usability and practicality is a primary motive of Jasmin's work. Her experience of security awareness spans organizations large and small, public and private, operational, and as a consultant. I'm also joined by Christopher Sant. He's a cybersecurity leader who has been helping secure Australian organizations for the last 15 years. He's passionate about clear and simple messaging to make cybersecurity easily accessible for everyone, and describes his secret ninja skill as being able to cut through the technical jargon to explain complex terms in ways that everyone can understand. And I think we all need a little bit of that in cybersecurity. So without further ado, let's get into it. So welcome both. My first question is to Jasmin, and then I will do the same question to you, Chris. So, 2020 we've always had a significant change event with the pandemic, and that spilled over pretty much into 2021. And the impact has been felt far and wide on the global population. How have organizations in your world been adapting to, this cyber culture shift and changing programs in 2021? And what are some of the things that they're looking to do in those programs differently?
Yeah. So 2021, we're just planning now, obviously, and I think one of the sort of mantras is that we have to be flexible and adaptive, and anything can change at any moment. That was certainly the experience of 2020. But one thing that we really had to be aware of was, people are going through a lot of change in their whole environment. Their life was, being turned upside down, and security isn't. It isn't everything. It's really important, but they've got a whole bunch of other things that they're thinking about. So it was very much around how can we integrate security thinking and embed security in an inintrusive way so that they can actually take on some practical tips. They can apply it to their everyday life. being simple, not overloading them with more stress. People were very
Yes.
stressed last year with many other, things to worry about. But given the security was so important, we had to make sure the messages came across. So, previous programs, we've had a whole wealth of topics, a whole wealth of objectives that we wanted to meet. Whereas last year, we kind of had to really pare back to what are the one or two things that are really important to get across and just help with those key focus areas. So, for example, with the global pandemic, we all saw a lot of phishing scams with COVID. And so, we're seeing it. We know that's a big issue. We know people individually are being impacted by it. Let's just focus that. Let's make sure people understand what's happening with that. What are the signs? What can they do to seek help? So a couple of just key priority areas and making sure people were really understanding the area. And just sort of more broadly, we know with global pandemics and cost pressures, budgets aren't as big as maybe they are in other times. So you have to think about how can you make do with maybe less, but make what you're doing really effective. So how can you extrapolate? So we last year, for example, launched a security coach program, which we'll probably end up talking about later, but it's how do we have that force multiplier effect, doing more with less. So just a couple of thoughts there.
That's great, Jasmin. Thanks very much. And the same question to you, Chris, in your experience or even organizations that you've worked in over the last year or so.
Yeah, pretty much mirroring exactly what Jasmin said. A couple of things to add to, sorry, can you hear me okay? A couple of things
we can hear you fine.
Awesome. A couple of things to add to that. I think prioritization. So there's so much going on. And to Jasmin's point, it's so hard because, the cyber team has so many priorities, but the comms team have their priorities, people and culture team have, so many things going on. So the cyber team can only really get so much airtime with the business. And so really prioritizing what are the key deliverables, what are the key things we want to take to the business, is running a cyber champs program going to be our one thing that we're going to run that's going to try and get in front of people, like being really selective, because if you try and spin too many plates, especially during a pandemic when people are going through cultural change, working from home, it's just too much. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is consolidation of materials. So, people are now no longer in the four walls of the office and now at home. They need to reach out on the intranet or reach out for policies, materials, what's permissible. So what I've seen work really well is consolidation. So maybe building like a small intranet hub that has everything you need for working from home and then everything you need for cyber requirements, just to make it easy for people so that they only have one place to go to rather than, we received an email that's got some requirements and then we received a flyer and then there's an intranet article here. And, I know when COVID started kicking in, you were getting emails every week about how you should securely work from home. And, just got to really tone back the messaging. I think that's probably the main things that jump out for me.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I can really relate to, lots of advice about working from home, because there was lots of advice, coming up on LinkedIn and lots of social media, and everybody suddenly became an expert in that area, and you didn't really know where to turn to with the advice. There was just too much. It was quite confusing, actually.
And what made that worse too is you have to think of people as people with lives at home and at work.
Absolutely,
so just because you've sent them one email a month or one email a week, they're also receiving emails from every other company that they've ever been on the database for about how they're tackling COVID, how, your gym, the old Video Easy store from 20 years ago, everyone's emailed you saying what their COVID policy is. So people are just a bit over it. So
of course.
Dialing back how much the verbosity level is, I think was really, really smart.
Makes sense. So Chris, and another question to you, kind of relating to, the COVID themed attacks, and Jasmin has mentioned this in her opening statement. How is the threat landscape evolving? I mean, and what can employees do to be alert to some of these new threats? And we've seen lots of COVID themed threats, and it's how can we respond to that? What can we do?
Well, it's a really good question. And I think this question's come up on social media quite a few times too. Like, do you send COVID themed phishing emails and do you send pandemic style phishing emails and that kind of thing? And I think People are very fatigued. So the answer to that's going to be very different depending on the organization. But
Sure.
got to remember that people are working from home. They're
Yeah.
juggling kids. You're not going to get the same phishing results that you got, 6 or 12 months ago. It's just not going to happen. So I think thinking about people holistically and thinking, okay, they're in a negative mindset. Maybe instead of, giving big bits of information in cyber education, maybe drip feeding and making things a bit more fun.
Yes. Yeah.
And not relying on that 1 a year communication, but instead, drip feeding small messages in a more personal way. Because the fact of the matter is those COVID and vaccine and financial related phishing emails, they're all going to keep coming. What you really want to do is engage the workforce so that irrespective of what themed campaign they get, they're engaged and they know how to click their report button, and that they're actually engaged to participate properly, as opposed to, I can't be bothered, I'm just going to click on anything from home.
Yeah. Jasmin, have you got any? I think that's great, Chris. Have you got anything that you could add to that, Jasmin? Just hearing what Chris has got to say.
I think you've covered the main things. I mean, obviously there's a wealth of threats that are happening, and a lot of them are exploiting the fact that we've got so many other touch points and devices connecting to the network.
Yeah.
But that's really the combination then of technology and people. So if we're just talking about people, I think just making sure that people are vigilant and they're aware of what those different threats could be. And when we do see things coming through the Security Operations Centre, we can provide some updates and awareness to staff on, so they're alert to that. Then doing that, quickly and just in layman's terms as well, is just really important.
Yeah, I completely agree. So Jasmin, just following on, I guess, some of the comments that Chris was making about, working from home and how that's affected how we'll need to think about, our culture programs.
Yeah.
How, from in your experience, recent experience over at least the last couple of years, how do we maintain that, that risk-aware security culture with a remote workforce? With many people working from home. Chris gave some examples there, but what examples do you see working really well?
Do you know, I mean, the first thing, sometimes it's these significant changes that actually, environmental changes that actually drive change. And, when a year ago or 2 years ago, when we all used to go into an office, you had the safety of the office walls, and there was this illusion that everyone was very well protected as soon as you stepped into the office. We're just protected by the corporate network. Whereas, suddenly everyone's thrown at home. Maybe they had their own device. Maybe they had a corporate device, but they're obviously using their home network. They're in charge of maintaining their home environment. And, you would have seen this, everyone's suddenly the CISO of their home. I think it actually jump-started a lot of people into thinking, okay, well, what do I actually need to do to be secure? So the actual initial transition to home was actually a really good kickstart to people taken on board some of the awareness and the messages that we were saying, and they were actually asking for information. Well, how do I protect my device? Like, what do I need? Am I doing everything I need to do to protect it? So like with any change program, you have phases. It never stays the same. So last year was very much focused on what are those key messages. We had a number of toolkits, for example, how to secure your home, how to secure your device, the questions that people were asking. So we knew this was what was important. And sending out those packs, having them available for people to read, having leader-led messages, and also having my team having conversations so that they knew that there was an opportunity to ask questions. So that was really effective last year. But times change now. 8 months, 10 months later, people are a bit more aware of that, and they've got into a bit more of a rhythm. They've got used to certain security tools saying, yes, you can do this, no, you can't do that, or how to maybe safely send information. So I think the culture now of today and the ability to securely enable remote working is to just see, just keep on the pulse with what's happening. What are the questions that are coming up? Keeping engaged with the businesses, making sure the resources are available. And as I mentioned before, we have the security coach programs. We have people across all the business areas who can bring back questions, and they often say, like, we don't know how to actually send information via you know, this secure information, can you come to our team and tell us about that, because we have to use that now. So it's yeah, just enabling people to do their work securely.
And just a follow-up question to that, Jasmin. I'm just curious, have you seen you and your team's workload expanding dramatically? Have you seen a spike, or is it you just reprioritize what you have to do?
Yeah, as I said before, I mean, it's about sort of prioritizing. So, you know, everyone's always working at 100% capacity, but it's how smart are you working? So we just are investing more actually in engagement. And you know, we really believe in sort of face-to-face or virtual face-to-face education, virtual face-to-face, joining team meetings. So there's just a lot more time spent on that, because that's where we're getting the return of our, you know, our time.
Good. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. So yeah, quick question to you, Chris. You know, to really embed, you know, this cyber resilient culture. You know, right now it's never been more important. But does this require a change in the enterprise security strategy, cybersecurity strategy? And if it does, what do you think are some of those important key steps that are required in shifting that overall cybersecurity strategy, in your view?
It's funny because I was rereading the Playbook quite recently, and a lot of this is really clearly outlined in there too. And I think you'd really start with documenting your current state and thinking about, well, where are the gaps? You know, calling a spade for a spade. Are the phishing results really bad? Is engagement really bad? You know, are we getting a lot of DLP events, data loss events? You know, just what is the current state? And then taking that position and documenting that as part of like an uplift strategy. And then thinking about, you know, where do you want to be? So you want to, you know, have employees, like what Jasmin was saying, highly engaged, you know, specific materials to specific employees, modeling the different types of roles and treating them as different, you know, not cookie cutter, but customizing your material, because the finance team needs different engagement to what a call center needs when you can't actually get face-to-face time with the whole team, right? Because they're all on calls. So documenting that in a really cohesive plan, and then going straight to the top and getting buy-in to actually get support from the top down. Because, you know, a lot of the examples Jasmin and I've talked about, you wouldn't really be able to get without support from the leadership down. You know, trying to run a championship program, a champions program, and get time across 20,000 staff and engage and burning time and hours and dollars, you can't do that unless you've got support. So documenting where you're at, figuring out where you want to get to, and then putting a position up and getting support, and then feeding that back again. So, you know, checking back and saying, okay, this is how we're doing. We've done our program. We've got engagement, uplifting. You know, that's probably what comes to mind.
Okay. And Jasmin, thanks, Chris. Did you see, I mean, you've got a Cesar, the organization that you work, was there a change in strategy there that, you know, was required at the higher level, so that you could change your culture programs in some way?
I mean, obviously there was a slight shift in security strategy to make sure our remote force was secured. So yes, from a technical side of things, there were some shifts there. And yeah, I mean, obviously the CISO very much supported having the engagement program and the coaches program, and making sure that we got airtime as needed, and just reinforcing messages across sort of the executive around what we're doing to support them, because it was very much, you know, we're here to support you. We know that everyone's out there on their own, and it is a, you know, risk. I think everyone was aware that there was quite a big risk being taken on by remote work situations. So it was more around, well, what are we doing to help you, to enable you to continue your business, and, you know, in a secure way, and this is how we can do it.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, we've certainly seen a lot of shift in our kind of culture programs that's been triggered by this event, and it's meant that we've made some tactical changes, but it's made us think that we need to revisit the more strategic ways of working. You know, things like zero trust as an architecture becomes much more important. So it helps protect individuals from themselves in many ways by using technology solutions, so that there's less for them to think about. We all know that people can make errors, and that's what we want to try to reduce, especially when they're roaming around on probably unsecured environments. So a slight shift in gears, really. And in my experience in senior roles that I've been either a CISO or a cybersecurity leader in an organization, I think it's fair to say that what I've recognized over the years is that without senior leadership, top-down support, and real galvanizing of the employees from that top-down position, your cyberculture programs are pretty much doomed to failure, because as charismatic as both of you, Chris, are, and Jasmin are, and maybe I'd like to think I am myself, the reality is we're just not going to galvanize an entire workforce into action because they all listen to the senior leadership, and that's the CEO. Okay, we can help facilitate it, but the real message of top down driving culture change definitely comes from the CEO and that C-suite. So what can Jasmin, what do you think CISOs and their senior leadership can do to educate the top of the house? Because if you want to get that traction, you've really got to educate them, the kind of board, the C-suite and business leaders.
Yeah.
Is there one or two impactful suggestions that you've either used or you've seen other use really well to really get that top-down traction to really kickstart a culture program?
Yeah, I mean, that could be answered in many ways. It is going to be dependent on the organization. Some board members or some senior members of organizations are more tech savvy, cyber savvy, maybe have experienced it. So it really, first of all, like with anything, is going to depend on what's your stakeholder environment that you're even trying to work into. So, one suggestion and things we've done is just an initial survey, some key questions. At the end of the day, the executive, the board, they are all people. And when we're talking about people change management, you have to get to know the people and really, the personas and devise programs that suit them. So actually trying to get some time and assess where they're at in this journey makes a lot of sense. So I would recommend that if you are able to have some kind of survey and assessment. And definitely some kind of education program. Now, again, if someone on that survey has said they have covered cybersecurity, they are certified in XYZ, they don't need to do it potentially.
Yes.
But there's other people who do. So it's just making sure everyone comes up to at least a really good understanding of what does cybersecurity mean for the organization, what are some of these key terms that they're going to hear, and and largely an external education course kind of goes down a bit better than having even someone from the organization go and present to them. It just adds a bit more sort of credibility for whatever reason, but it does. So I would certainly recommend finding a suitable level course certification to get them across. Then they've really sort of understood those fundamentals, and then they can have a better conversation with the CISO around what it means to the organization.
I think that's good because they're coming from an informed place then, and then there's much more of a two-way dialogue rather than a one-way monologue, and I think that's really important. I mean, Chris, is there anything that you'd add to that in your experience? That because I think we've talked about this before, haven't we? How do you kind of get that engagement? And there's things like gamification, I think, has been talked about as well. But you can add to that.
Yeah, sure. It's a good point. I think Jasmin's point's really valid. Getting that 101 fundamental in front, and getting everyone speaking the same language so that they feel like they're on a journey rather than just being given reports and updates with technical terms that they don't understand. But the gamification I've seen firsthand in multiple organizations, at the exec and board level, how you bring a third-party vendor in, they'll run some gamified cyber war type of thing, and it looks more like a stage event, quite an extravaganza with lights flashing and LCD screens going in. And it's really it's quite interesting watching them basically play, red team, blue team cyber tennis. They're having to think on their feet and try and attack and defend each other. And, we got to buy a firewall. We've got to, put these controls in. I found that really engaging. So the gamification was really good. I've also seen a digital footprinting piece work really well. So the same way that we engage, the regular folk through the organization, through teaching them about cyber safety at home with their kids, etc., and then getting a natural engagement uplift because you're kind of winning hearts and minds. Doing that, at the board and exec level too, where you get a vendor in. I've done this for clients before, and check out what's available online through open source intelligence about them. And then you basically give each board member a dossier of their, we can figure out where your kids go to school, where you live, how much you paid for your house, when you bought it, give them a family diagram of all their relatives that you figured out based on their, Facebook information. And it just makes them more informed about the power of data, and it really wins buy-in. It's expensive to do, but it can be a really good exercise to really get them on the same page. So I've seen those things work really well, and I think just keeping a dialogue open. So I think that there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll just add another thing. I know this worked really well at a previous organization, gosh, a long time ago, but we did a board walkthrough of the Security Operations Center, and that was really good because they could actually see the real live data events, ask questions like, what does that mean, like why is that looking like it's a critical issue, where's that coming from, and then it then enabled a discussion both on the investments that we've made, but also what are we seeing, what are we doing about it, what does it mean to the business. So it's actually bringing those exec into the life and soul of security and making it alive.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes it very real then, doesn't it? Especially when they see just how many attacks are coming in that we're defending against. It can be a bit surprising because obviously incidents happen, but they don't know how many attacks are actually coming in, which is huge amounts, obviously.
Just to add to that, actually, that's a really good point. I've seen many organizations do that. And I've actually seen, for example, the organization through relationships through CISOs, they might get an invitation from the bank that their company banks with. This is obviously pre-COVID, to visit the cyber operations center, or visiting the data center that they have their cloud provider with, inviting them to visit the data center cyber operations center. So it doesn't necessarily have to be just yours. I've seen CISOs use their network and relationships to actually leverage other resources as well.
Excellent. That's great. Thanks, guys. So I'm going to ask this question to both of you, but it'd be good just to get your view, Chris. So, this once a year mandatory training, you mentioned it earlier, actually, with a test and then even just running simulating phishing exercises, has kind of been at the center really of most kind of traditional change culture programs. And, trying to, find this shift in behavior is what we're really trying to find, and be able to measure it. Can you share any kind of, what you regard as proven examples of delivering measurable culture change across an enterprise? Because ultimately that's the test, right? We do all these things, but what really shifts the dial towards, now we can actually measure the fact that we've seen a shift in the culture and behavior has changed, and we've become more resilient. And we can say, look at this. This is how we know things have changed. So it'd be good just to share any examples of how you might have been able to put certain measures in, Chris, and then what has been the result of that as a result of those measures and behavior changes. You're going, oh look, that's a good example right there.
Yeah, cool. That's a really good question. So if I think about that, the organizations that have done really well in moving the dial to up the ante and increase cyber culture have been the ones that aren't taking things for granted and actually questioning why things are done the way that they're done and how they're done. So, you mentioned having the annual compliance training. I think a lot of organizations would agree that their annual compliance training is pretty ordinary. So going back and taking a look at, well, do we really have to do it like this? Is there a way that we can, I don't know, maybe take some of these modules out, do a lightweight kind of tick the box exercise, refresh it, and then instead start, using our cyber team to now start engaging with teams individually and running the program differently and getting, as Jasmin was saying, face-to-face or face-to-Zoom kind of thing. Because those compliance modules, I don't think they secure anyone. you know.
No.
You know what I mean?
I don't know about you, but I myself don't like doing them. So when you're giving them to the general population, you can only imagine what impact it's having.
Correct. And a lot of these questionnaires, they're 5, 7, 10 years old. The
Yeah.
phishing landscape was very different back then. And they're doing things like saying, oh, if there's bad spelling in the email, it's probably phishing, or that, very basic, mundane things, when realistically, anyone can get spoofed, and the email could look like anything, right? So
Yeah,
that's the first, that's the first thing. A couple other things too. So I think Jasmin may have touched on this before, but sharing operational information with the wider teams. So, if you've got a threat hunting team or a cyber intelligence team, sharing that information with your general population, saying, hey, these are some examples of real phishing emails that we've received, so that people don't see it as a theoretical threat. It's actually real. And you show them examples where your CEO or your staff are being impersonated through fake Gmail account. Like, that really does hit people, because they're like, oh, wow. So it's not just a pretend thing. It's real. That I've seen that work really. And I've talked about this before too, but teaching people about cybersecurity as a life skill, so that they learn about it at home and protect themselves, and they will naturally care more. And I've found that's probably the one thing that's got the biggest engagement uplift, is treating people like a holistic person that needs to stay safe at home and stay safe at work. And that's probably the one thing that I've noticed has helped to really turn up the dial out of everything that I've mentioned.
It's that relatability. People can make the connection with home and family and things like that much easier, can't they? Yeah.
Correct. Well, most people, I think the e-safety commissioner, they gave a presentation recently. They talked about people in the sandwich conundrum. So they talked about they've either got kids on one side or elderly parents on the other. So they're either trying to, and it's true. Like, I've got this now. I've got a 7 and a 4-year-old. So I'm trying to protect their laptops and iPads and what my son's watching on YouTube on the TV. And at the same time, worrying about grandparents and elderly parents getting scammed out of their life savings.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Yeah.
That element is relatable to everyone. There's nobody who doesn't really have one or the other. So
absolutely.
I find that's a really good lead. And then if you start, the conversation there and also bring in work-related stuff, you'll naturally get a better result.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so obviously you've heard from Chris, Jasmin. Is there anything to add to that? I mean, this delivering measurable culture change is always tricky. Chris gives some good examples there. I mean, and maybe talk about any metrics that you might use.
Well, I think that's the thing. I think that's why it's really hard, because metrics are pretty hard, not because you can't define them, but just sometimes to be able to collect them around culture change is challenging. So, certainly having tools and capabilities in place will help. So, even thinking about, secure coding, well, that is a cultural thing. Like, are your developers skilled? Are they thinking? Are they prioritizing security in their design versus speed or whatever? So you can start to see some of that just through the results of, how many criticals, how many, vulnerabilities were assessed during the development, how many were fixed, etc. Same with, for everyone, if you have a data loss prevention tool set in place, monitoring outbound email, well, it's not just about, well, what's happening, but are users actively classifying their data? Do they even understand, like, what's a sensitive document? So there's different elements that you can start to see. Are people getting what secure behavior is? But you do need to have the tools and the insights. And I think that's why phishing has been popular, because it was quite an easy tool just to get some measurement of. But it's not to say it's the only thing. There's, and even things like, exemptions. How many times are people requesting an exemption? And is it because they legitimately need it, or are they being lazy because they don't want to go to the next step of making a secure behavior change? So it's a big area to unpack, and lots of data, but I think it is important, and the insights and being data led and understanding what's actually happening will then enable effective behavior change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's increasingly more technology solutions, and we started this call by saying technology is not the answer, but inserting technology to have data-driven decision making as part of a security awareness culture change program, has got to be helpful. So I think there are some new tools coming out around that. I don't know if anybody of you have explored any of those or finding anything particularly useful in that space, but I think that's where we can start to see this leap forward into the future.
Just to add to that too, I guess kind of mixing both sides, but we're trying to measure a human control through a technology statistic or through a technology tool.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult thing to do. So something I've found really valuable to communicate some of that culture change is actually to share anecdotal feedback from employees about, feedback on how they've had an uplift, or feedback of, thanking the cyber team for that engagement. Because I know it's really good when you get that positive feedback, and then sharing some of that in a reporting style that's a bit kind of infographic.
Yeah.
Because it's very hard to put a hard percentage statistic on some of these things. Like sometimes there's a bit of gray area there, and I found those anecdotal reported examples really useful too.
It's a question for both of you on this as well, because I know increasingly now, or certainly I've observed in the industry, a shift on the end of year training. So we know you do this end of year training, and you have to go through all the modules, and then you do the questions at the end. I have started to see this upfront assessment, which obviously verifies your skills, and if you pass that, then you don't need to do the rest of it. So it's more of this kind of selective training, if you like, either by role or skill capability. So there's this element of segmentation, if you like. And is that something that you've looked at? So we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but how you can treat people differently based on either the role that they do, their skills capability, and you could do an assessment. So what you might end up doing is thinking, well, there's actually which is another thing to think about, I guess, is we could actually drive some efficiencies around this, because we've done some training on these folks. We already know they've got a high level, yet the high risk areas over here, who are protecting the crown jewels and got access to information that's ultra sensitive, we've done some sampling there, and their education's quite low, and you're thinking, well, where do I shift? So you got examples of that where you've kind of have to shift your focus and either do some assessment to determine which teams to focus on, or what they've got access to. Have you got any examples?
Well, I mean, phishing is a good example, because that's certainly not something that's mandated yet by the regulators in terms of training.
Yeah.
We obviously want as many people to go through training as possible, so that we know that they fully understand and are protected against that, or vigilant against that threat. But look, some people are very savvy and will never fall victim, and that's where the data from phishing simulations can actually help categorize those people. So we're not going to spend lots of time focusing on the people who have always reported and never fallen victim, but the ones who are susceptible and do fall victim, maybe due to certain reasons, well, then we can then actually actively engage with them. So I think that's a good example of just being a bit more focused, and it also means we're not annoying people who don't really need to have the training, but really,
of course,
in the right way. But I mean, I like that idea, because we are doing more targeted training, and again, because especially when they're not mandatory training, you want to be able to have some kind of assessment to go, well, look, we're actually helping you because you're not really strong in these 3 areas, so here are some courses to help you on those points. But for someone who maybe is a security guru, even if they're not in a security team, they don't need to. So it's being sensitive to where people's skill sets are, and I think that then gives more credibility to what we're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, have you got anything to add from that and kind of that segmentation piece?
I found it challenging to segment, because usually most organizations who have that compliance training, usually the compliance training is mandated through like a separate risk and compliance team.
Of course,
and it's an immovable brick wall, like everyone needs to tick the box, and there's no getting around that. So I've personally found it a very difficult sell. So it's almost like you have to tell people, really sorry, you've got to do the training to do the training. But to Jasmin's point, I've seen a lot of really good success in actually looking at the performance of people with phishing and trying to actually pull out the data to say, well, let's get a separate stat for the system admins or the high risk users or people who can, approve payments. And let's get some stats on those high risk users who are also highly susceptible. And let's see if we need to do some targeted training there, because ultimately you want to get the biggest bang for buck for your time to reduce the risk as possible.
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
You might find by doing 4 or 5 targeted workshops for, across finance, IT admins, etc., who are not performing as well as they could be in terms of phishing, that can work really well. You just need to sell it really carefully, because you don't want to make people feel like they're being alienated because they've accidentally clicked on a link a couple of times when they've been busy homeschooling their poor kids or something, and you're making them sit through a workshop. So there's no easy answer, but I relate to a lot of what Jasmin said.
Yeah, there's almost an element of looking for ways to reward the good behavior rather than just penalizing people who sometimes honestly made a mistake. You do sometimes get the repeat offenders, and they do start to appear, and you're like, well, we really need to do something about this. But I think the rewards is interesting as well. If you find people doing the right things, how do you incentivize that? But I think that's quite tricky, because then what are you rewarding them with? Because I think there's been lots, I've certainly been parts of culture change programs where there's been a gamified reward system, but it's like you're attaining badges in some degree, but what value do you associate with that? You need to kind of make it tangible so people can some value that what you're giving them, rather than just saying it's just badges. I'm a busy corporate guy, why do I need badges? But
go ahead, Jasmin.
I was going to say, maybe the value is you don't have to do your annual compliance training. You proactively choose learning because you're interested in these subjects, you pass all these tests, and then you don't have to do it.
There you go.
There you go. I think that's a great. Yeah, go on, Chris.
I was going to say, I've seen one organization do this really well, where they actually tried to not gamify it, but kind of like have like a leaderboard where they actually reported based on at the management level, what the reporting statistics were. So not who clicked, but who reported, and then the aggregate percentages for those teams. Or did something like, if you reported X number of emails throughout the year, you would get to go into a draw and get like a coffee card for your team or something, like just trying to, reinforce things positively. But it's really difficult, especially now with COVID and everyone working from home or not working from home and going back and forth to the office. These things are really difficult to do.
Yeah, absolutely. The bit about if you do well, you have to do your training. An interesting one, isn't it? Because to be honest with you, I think I mentioned this earlier. Then there's a bit of a productivity training. I mean, I recently did some training in the company I worked in, and it took a hell of a long time. If you think about that dedicated time that you spend on that, not just that one training, but all the trainings that you have to get through from a compliance perspective, it's going to be quite intense.
Yeah, definitely.
So we're kind of coming to the close. I've only got my final question. And the final question for both of you is, what are your top 3 tips for CISO and their leadership teams for 2021 in terms of pivoting their culture change programs to be more effective? And we've talked about lots of different examples. So, if you just come up with your top 3 tips. And just to add to that, I guess, is, it's if there's those 3 tips, how could, if you were in this roles that you're in now, and how would you go to the CISO or whoever's responsible for the strategy for making sure those things happen? So it's kind of a double element to it. What are the 3 things? And then for those 3 things, how do you get them? How do you actually make them stick by saying, look, CISO, we really need to do these if you want to make the change. So I'll start with you, Jasmin, and then we'll go over to Chris.
I mean, I was thinking about this actually earlier, and I think the CISO needs to really be a strong influencer themselves for a human behavior program. I think the CISO, traditionally their role has been very much technology focused, and great that they start to have a culture awareness person within their team, but often it's like, I'm doing all of this and you just handle that. and you
Yes,
deal with all the messaging. But actually, because we talk about board engagement, we talk about you need to have your peers on board, you need to embed the discussion at the business strategy level. The CISO needs to be a stronger advocate around human change and cybersecurity, as well as the technology component. So I think that's really important. And so, but that does mean for many CISOs, that's a new skill set, it's a new angle. They may need convincing. So time needs to be taken to make sure that they actually are fully on board with it. They understand what it means, why, and can actually genuinely advocate for that. So that'd be my first point. Second, just as we've said before, I'd say keep it simple. Again, probably then coaching the CISO that there may be one or two priority areas. It's not going to be that everyone's going to be cyber savvy in every single element. It's going to be, phishing and passwords or data handling, and that's what the change is going to be. So just set your expectations. That's what we're shifting the dial on. And then third, again, I mentioned before, having something like a security champion ambassador program, which is business wide, to enable that force multiplier effect of communicating, scalability. But again, that really comes back to that first point around CISO influence, because you really need to have the other execs across the business agreeing to have those people spend 1 to 2 hours a month or whatever it becomes to invest in security and really continue to sell the message and work with the security team.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think you're right on the CISOs or CISO or whatever power world you call them. Yeah, they're literally going to have to live and breathe this thing, right? It's not it's going to have to be part of their makeup. It's going to have to be the way that they operate. Because if you want to win, because ultimately where you want the adoption and controls to really be effective are typically in the businesses, which are more on the outward facing parts of the organization where the real business is done. And if you're going to influence those key stakeholders, you need to be understanding the impact that culture change can have. So I think that's a really powerful one. And I think the more that CISOs can embrace that and really live and breathe it, I think they'll make a big difference in their organizations. So good 3 tips there. Thanks, Jasmin. And Chris, what are your 3 tips for CISO teams for pivoting culture change program to be more effective in 2021?
It's going to be really hard to beat Jasmin's points because she's already touched on some really good. At first, I was happy that she went
first.
I was happy that she went first. I'm thinking, hold on, that's kind of make things more tricky.
Ticking them off the ones that you'd have,
yeah, but I've probably got a slightly different angle, and this is some of the things that I'm focusing on with my clients. But the first thing is around simplification. So just simplifying absolutely everything: the comms, the messaging, the materials. What you've got on the intranet. The complexity around your phishing programs, how many times you're doing, just thinking about how can I simplify things to the point where they're no simpler and everyone's really clear, simplifying reporting. It's just nobody has time for the noise. So I think that's really important. The second thing is not being afraid to rebuild things from scratch. So what I was talking about before about, taking things for granted. This is how we've always done it. This is the reporting template that they've asked for, or, whatever it is. I think not being afraid to question and rebuild things, I think that's really powerful. I had a client recently that we had to put the phishing program on hold for 3 months while we redid everything before we could kind of continue on. And for that 2 or 3 months, it was really tricky because, people like, where's our quarterly phishing stat to report? And well, we're really sorry, but we're going to, revisit that once we're ready. And then now we've matured the reporting, the service, and everything's going really well. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing, which I think is really important, is just engaging the absolute whole business and getting in front of everyone. And whether you're doing that through a delegate, whether you're doing that through a champions network, whatever it is, the CISO or the cyber team needs to position themselves so that they've got a finger on the pulse with absolutely every area of the business. And I think that this is probably like a number 4 tip, but sort of part number 3 is branding your cyber team internally so that people understand where you are, who you are, how they can contact you. is really important, because you want to be first of mind when something goes wrong and people want to pick up the phone.
Yeah, excellent. I can really relate to that last one, Chris. It's this easy to do business with, easy to understand, clear, single point of contacts. You definitely don't want to be difficult to understand how you operate. People need to be very clear how to interact, how to report incidents, because that engagement is one of the other indicators, right? If you're getting a lot of questions coming in and you're responding a lot, that's a really good indicator that the culture's shifting.
Correct.
In the organization, because there's much more engagement with the security team, rather than we're not talking to that lot over there, or worse still, we don't even know who the security team are.
Correct.
So I think that's a really good kind of indicator generally that the culture changes has really shifted.
Because there's no, as a Cesar, you're trying to build capability and services.
Sure.
If those services aren't frictionless, aren't easy, and they're not advertised, so people don't know that they have a phishing button, or people don't know that, you have all these resources available to them, then they may as well not exist. So I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Well, great. Well, thank you. Thanks to both of you. And I know it's late for both of you where you are, and it's starting to get a little bit dark where I am as well. So I really appreciate taking the time out. Thanks again, Chris. Thanks, Jasmin, and we'll speak again soon. Cheers.
Well, thanks,
Darren. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye. The Cyber Leadership Institute exists for one single purpose, and this is accelerating the career paths of emerging cybersecurity leaders, enabling them to land the top job and thrive amongst the C-suite, be that a CISO role or a similar cybersecurity executive role. We do this by delivering best-in-class digital training programs, exclusive membership to a thriving global community, which is called the Cyber Leadership Hub. The platform gives access to members to tools, templates, and strategies, and they can connect with one another to share ideas and support one another as they advance their careers.